Well, what happened was Michael Crawford, who I'd made a big Hollywood star with the Jokers, rang me, said, I've been sent this script. I'd like you to do it. Well, I looked at the script. It said exterior Rome, exterior Tokyo, exterior Australia, exterior Vienna. I thought, this is a nice trip. I'll have that. But you know, this is a film which today would cost $200 million. And the interesting thing is that in those days, they didn't have digital. If you wanted to fill a stadium with 75,000 people, you can do it on the computer today. This was 1969. So we had at least two stadiums, the White City and the Olympic Stadium in Rome, that had to be full of people. The Rome Stadium, 75,000 people. So I said to the producer, it's a joke, I said, well, I'm going to make fiberglass people. And one's going to sit like this, and one's going to sit like this, and one's going to sit like that. And we'll make 75,000 fiberglass people. And we'll put some real people among them. Well, it had never been done before. This American producer, sweet fella, kept saying, will it work? I said, how do I know it'll work? It's never been done. So we made the people, and the first trouble we got was at the White City Stadium. The head of the British Crowd Artists Extras Union was a wonderful character called Paddy Brannigan. He cheated at every election and got himself re-elected. And the BBC and all the press said this is another fraud, but he didn't give a shit, he got elected. And we're at White City, and my assistant said at 12:30, Paddy is pulling all the extras. And I look around the stands, and the extras have all left. So I said, well, we better call an early lunch, and I'll deal with it. So, but find me Paddy Brannigan. After about 40 minutes, they find Paddy Brannigan, who was having a Guinness somewhere. He comes to see me. I said, Paddy, what the f is going on? There's no single extra here. Well, he says, an absolute disgrace, he said. I'm not having my people sit next to those plastic people. They'll catch a disease from them. I said, no, they won't catch a disease from fiberglass, Paddy. Yes, they will, he said. I won't have it. It's terrible. I said, Paddy, never mind the blarney. What do you want? Well, he said, I want £3 extra for each of them. And we had about 2,000. He said, I want £3 extra for each of them. I said, dare I ask, Paddy, why should they get £3 extra each? Well, he said they were asked to cut, and it was snowing. You remember the scene there? It was snowing. The snow was on the ground. He said, well, they were asked to come in their summer clothing. I said, of course they were asked to come in their bloody summer clothing. It's midwinter, there's snow on the ground. Yes, he said, they were asked to come in summer clothing. Well, I said, so you're telling me they brought summer clothing? He said, yes. I said, well, where is it, Paddy? Well, it's obvious, isn't it, Michael? It's under their winter clothing. And that's how it was in those days, you know. When we went to Rome, we had 2,500 extras a day, which is a lot of people. But and it's meant to be very hot, but it wasn't hot. And suddenly I see people among the crowd with fur coats and umbrellas and oodles of scarves. I said, what the f are they doing? I'm paying 2,500 people to look like it's hot. Ah, Mr. Winner, they said, that is the other extra group. You're not paying them. So another group turns up. I said, well, what are you doing? Well, Mr. Winner, we want our people used in the film as well. We want the same number of people, 2,500. I said, you're crazed, I said. So I think we settled for 1,000 extra people. They blackmail you all the time, you see. So they were so thrilled when they got the 1,000. They said, can we have a photo of you for our office? But this happens in movies, particularly in those days. It was anarchy, absolute anarchy.
So aside from the extras, what about that incredible cast you assembled there?
They got paid too. The cast, we started, of course, with Michael Crawford. He was in it. Then Richard Zanuck was the head of Fox, ran every morning, and he tended to run with Ron O'Neill. So Ron O'Neill was a perfectly good choice. He'd only done Peyton Place. Then I wanted Aznavour. And Richard Zanuck said to me, have you seen Aznavour's legs? I said, well, no, not really. He said, well, you've got to send me a photograph of Charles Aznavour's legs, or you can't use him. So I said to Charlie Aznavour, Charlie, I'm very sorry, dear, but you've got to take your knickers off. We want a photo. And I can still see the picture. It was on the steps of his mansion in Paris. And he's standing there in his underpants, showing his legs, which we sent to Zanuck, who thought they were sturdy enough legs. I mean, it was all run like a lunatic asylum, honestly. Stanley Baker, great actor. Supposedly ferocious, but a lovely man. I remember at the premiere, Stanley Baker's this big, tough action hero. He said to me, Michael, well, what do you think? I said, what do you mean, Stanley? He said, what do you think? About what, Stanley? He said, my new hairpiece. He was a lovely man, lovely man. It was a pleasure to be with him. Ron O'Neill could be a total pain in the arse, but he, as a result of that movie, he got Love Story. It was written by Eric Siegel, who wrote the games. He got Love Story, and that launched him. And then he became a monster. Well, but he wasn't bad with me. Now, I'll tell you a funny thing. Richard Zanuck wanted to make the film because he's mad about the Olympics. And he's down in Mexico at the Olympics, and he's come back. And Ron O'Neill says to me, don't forget this was 1969, he said, Michael, have you seen the TV viewing figures for the Olympics? He said, in the top 100 programs, the Olympics are 99. He said, nobody's watching them free on television. So who's going to go to the cinemas and pay to see it? So I went to Richard Zanuck. I said, Richard, dear, you know, it's been pointed out to me that Olympics are 99 out of 100 and TV free. Who's going to pay to see the film? And Richard Zanuck froze. And he said, are you quitting? I said, no, Richard, I don't quit. You can do it in black and white, hand-drawn cartoons. Doesn't worry to me. I'll be there, dear. I'm just telling you. And I could see his face now. He kind of sighed. He said, well, it's too late now. What he meant was that if he cancelled then, it would be a blot on 20th Century Fox. They announced the film with great flair. And now suddenly they're pulling the film. It doesn't look good to the trade. So when he said it was too late now, it means it really doesn't matter if nobody's going to see it. We have to go in and make it anyway. Now, the other funny thing was we're making this film, and I had deals with the Olympic Committee in Rome and the Olympic Committee in Australia to use the Olympic flag and the Olympic emblems. And we're shooting in England, actually. A man brings an envelope to me. And the envelope is from the Olympic Committee in Geneva. It says, we understand you're making a film about the Olympic Games. May I please remind you that you have no permission to use the Olympic emblem. You have no permission to use the words Olympic Games. And if you do so, you will be sued. So the Fox lawyers went into panic. They go into panic about anything. I said, well, what can they do? I've got signed agreements with Rome and Australia giving me the Olympic flag and the Olympic emblem. How can they can't sue me. I've got a signed agreement. So I said, ignore it, who cares? Just get on with it. So we got on with it, and they didn't do anything, of course, but when it came to the poster, they didn't use the Olympic emblem at all. They made some cockamamie poster with sort of figure of Michael Crawford looking like he'd just won the egg and spoon race. It's about all he could win. God, he's a sweet fellow there, but he was completely nuts, Michael. I mean, there's a nutty actor. Nutty. Absolutely nutty.
Would you care to elaborate?
Well, I mean, Michael Crawford was known as being utterly impossible. I was very friendly with him. Great sense of humour he had. But Michael Crawford was so stupid that when he starred in Hello, Dolly, the billing, amazingly, was Barbara Streisand, Walter Matthau, and Michael Crawford in Hello, Dolly. In the Odeon Cinema Marble Arch, there was a big picture in the foyer of Streisand and Matthau. And the caption underneath said, Barbara Streisand, Walter Matthau, and Hello, Dolly. Michael sued 20th Century Fox because his name wasn't on the photo caption. Wow. I mean, he's nuts.
Right.
He put himself away. You know, he was out of work for years.
Frank Spencer.
And he came back with No Sex, Please We're British, in which he was brilliant. It's where he created the silly character.
The prototype for the Frank Spencer.
What?
Frank Spencer.
Frank Spencer.
Yeah.
You can almost see him a little bit at the beginning of this film, I think,
Oh,
where he
yeah,
laughs
yes,
and things.
yes. He's a brilliant comedian,
Yeah.
but he put his career in the toilets. You're dealing with people who are wounded and insecure. I don't care how famous they are. Orson, we had at this very theatre, Orson Welles, and he had to fill in his insurance form. And he was crying because the film he'd made prior to, I'll never forget what's his name, was Mother Riley's Great Adventure or something. And he was literally in tears because here was a man who had made Citizen Kane, and he had to put on the form that this is what he was down to. It's the most sensitive, lovely man. But very damaged, no question. But a pleasure to work with, pleasure. Orson Welles, unbelievable. And he was here, they said to me, Mr. Welles wants to see you. So I went to his caravan, was parked outside there, slightly different layout then. He said, Michael, you're not being fair to me. I said, beg your pardon, sir? He said, Michael, you're not being fair to me, you're being very unfair. I said, I'm so sorry, Orson, dear. What can I do? He says, you keep photographing me from below. If you photograph me from below, I look fat. Now, you could photograph Orson from a helicopter, he looked f***ing fat in the story. So I said, and it's true that if you photograph me from below, they look fat. So he said, in future, Michael, I want eye-level shots, eye-level shots. I said, absolutely, sir. Eye-level shots. He said, not your eye level, Michael. My eye level. I mean, these are treasured moments. I said to Orson, you've made Citizen Kane. You've made Magnificent Ambersons. You've made some of the finest films in the history of cinema. Is there something you'd like to do before you die? He said, yes, he said, I'd like to make one film that shows a profit. None of these films showed a profit. And he asked me over to Los Angeles. The American Film Institute gave this enormous tribute to him. And everybody was there. And he went to the microphone. And he said, you know, he said, in this room, there's the head of every studio. There's every major employer. There's every executive, there's every producer, and you've all come to pay me tribute, but none of you will employ me. I thought that was so sad, and it was true, they never did employ him. Very sad, very sad. You know, they've got a life, these people. They're not just the god Orson Welles, they're damaged and looking for work.
We're gonna.
Do you miss making movies, Michael?
Well, I miss it, but you know, it's a different game now. The great thing, when I was making movies, there were no computers. If Charlie Bronson drove the car through the first floor window, and the car crashed onto the ground and then miraculously drove on. You know, you had to put a real car with a man in it through the window and onto the ground. And when you said cut, everyone rushed in to see if the fellow was still alive. There's a certain thrill in that. It's all done a computer. Who cares? So it's a totally different game. What a director does is he gets a script and he reads it, and unless he's got some lunatic ideas, he films the script exactly as written. Now, there was no reason to change the script. It was written by a very distinguished writer called Eric Siegel, who went on to write Love Story. Within the realms of what it is, it made sense very well. I think it was a well-written script. It was from an enormous Australian bestseller by a man called Hugh Atkinson. So I don't know how quickly we introduced the characters.
There's some very quick cuts at the start there. They are quite...
Quick cuts?
Yeah, and then you see Australia, England, you know, sort of jumps around.
Well, I've always done that sort of thing. I've always believed in getting a move on. Don't give the audience time to think. Because they may realise it's all a load of crap. Get a move on.